G'day guys, welcome back to New Dollarton. So today we're going to be doing something pretty interesting. We're going to be redeveloping up the old industrial shorefront of New Dimesburg and turning it into something a little bit more practical. So these old smoky factories and noisy warehouses, they just no longer fit within the city. They no longer fit on our shorefront. I think that we can do a lot better. I think that we can push it out, and I think we can redevelop up into something of a parkland, into some residential areas, and even some businesses could set up shop around here. So we're going to push it out. We're going to send the industry elsewhere. Although not all of it. I do want to keep just a smidge of it because I love it when cities reuse and repurpose these old industrial areas and you can still see just remnants of it. I really love that. So we're going to do that. We're going to redevelop up some of those areas, but then I also really love it when those parts are kind of crumbling and falling apart. And I feel like sometimes cities kind of sneak them behind the scenes, but then you notice them, you see them on Google Earth, and it's always so much fun. So I kind of want to do that too. I want to have some areas that are crumbling and some areas that need a little bit of extra love, but kind of just behind the scenes, you know, that sort of stuff. I'm actually thinking I might turn these two into some sort of residential area, maybe some high density apartments can sit on both of these. And this one, I'm actually thinking I might turn into a bit of a park because we do have this train line and I think that we can do something pretty interesting with this. I think you know where I'm going with this, but this is an old industrial train line that used to run and connect up some of the industry that's set around here. And I think that we can repurpose this into a bit of a parkland and turn all of this train line into a bit of a feature that sits around here, maybe a bit of a nod to the industrial past. We do have a bit of that sits around here. And obviously this is like the old path the industry used to take as it kind of stretched all the way through here. And I think the first thing I'm going to do is try to make it look like this was connected at some stage. So I'm going to use movement and anarchy here, and I'm going to drag it super close to the road. I'm going to just make that a little bit smoother, and then I'm going to raise this up just like this. So it's just nice and flush against that road, and we're going to leave it because I think that this would be a nice little pathway. In fact, I could even use anarchy to turn this into a bit of a walkway as people walk along here and connect up to the parkland. Oh yeah. That'd be super nice. Okay, I think we're going to start here, and I'm going to commit, and I'm going to delete this. I'm going to redevelop all of this. Alright, so I'm thinking about building some sort of large building around here, maybe something commercial, maybe an office building, haven't quite decided yet. But I definitely want to build some modern apartment buildings on either one of these piers, and I'm just trying to figure out how exactly I'm going to do that. Because I'm leaning towards using Find It and scrolling through and just trying to find buildings that I think are going to match the types of architecture that I have in my mind. I've got a bit of an idea of what I want to be building. However, I just don't think these growables are going to cut it. I don't think they're quite what I'm after. So I'm leaning towards potentially using some of these signature buildings and splicing them up together, which means I'm going to be building multiple of these, and I haven't necessarily unlocked them. Might be a little bit controversial. I think I'm just going to do it anyway. I guess I'll just see what happens. But this area is going to be really nice. It's going to be full of little piers and walkways. Very walkable, very nice. It's going to be lovely. Okay, so first up, where is that rail yard that we built in the last episode? All you sleuths who are trying to figure that out, if you have not seen it, it's because I haven't built it yet. This was all built before that episode. This was actually meant to come out last weekend, but I decided just to switch up the order. And that also goes for a lot of the tools that we're playing with. So Extra 3.0 and Asset Importer and decals, all those things do not exist in this save at the moment, and I won't be using any of them, but I am able to achieve a pretty high amount of detail within this area, and I'm so happy with how it turns out. I'm trying to play around with some of these growables at this stage, trying to figure out if I can splice them together and make some sort of custom building, but the tricky thing with this is that unlike City Skylines 1, where you could splice together growbles and they'd be totally fine about it. In this version at the moment, you can't do that. They only like it when they are on some sort of zoned area, and they really don't like it when you splice them together. So this was not going to work. Instead, I decided just to stick with a signature building, and this one in particular, I felt like was going to be a good fit. But before we got to that, before we start placing down the buildings, I figured we should probably figure out what the landscape's going to look like. The original plan was to have two pretty ordinary, just rectangular docks just jutting out into the water. However, with the harbor so close to the one on the right, it meant that we had this little section just eating into it, and I couldn't terraform over the top. So I decided to take that opportunity and just make it a bit more of a triangle shape. And I actually think this is going to work out a whole lot better, and I'm kind of glad this ended up happening this way, because I think it just makes it look a little bit more interesting and a bit more varied, and it kind of makes that whole section just a bit more open and wide. Kind of makes me think, what was that area before it was that modern harbor and that ferry service? Maybe it was something that was much larger in terms of an industrial site. I don't really know. If you've got any ideas, let me know, because it would be kind of nice to place down a couple of bits and pieces as a bit of a nod to that old industrial section. But for now, it's just going to be pretty modern. But there is a section that I do have a couple of questions about, and I'll talk about that within the live play coming up. I'm using Anarchy and Move It here just to help create these keys. Otherwise, this would be really challenging, almost borderline not possible. I don't know why they made it so hard to create keys within City Skylines 2. Maybe this is something that'll get fleshed out a little bit more down the track, like in City Skylines 1, because keys weren't a thing at base game, so maybe this is something that they're planning for a bit later on. But for now, I reckon just use Move It and Anarchy. That works pretty well. And then with that, I was ready to start playing around with this signature building. Yes, just the one signature building. Unfortunately, this is like the only building that has this type of architecture. There were a couple of growbles that were a little bit similar, but without the ability to be able to splice the growbles together, it makes it pretty much impossible to use them. However, the signature buildings work really well. You can drag them wherever you like. They can splice together as long as they have some sort of road connection. And here I am using this pedestrian street, which works really well because it means that no vehicles are going to be really driving around here. It's just going to be reserved for pedestrians. And to be honest, I actually kind of like the fact that it is a super powered signature building now, because there's like, I don't know, 10 of them inside just the one. It's now kind of like acting the same way, but just in a way more powerful way. And I kind of like that. It kind of makes it a little bit more interesting. After splicing together the building, I had a little bit of extra space at the front of the wharf that I needed to figure out what to do with. And I thought that this would probably be a good spot to add in something of a park for the people that lived here, and some tennis courts would be a great fit. And I actually chose the tennis courts because I felt like we needed to take up a little bit of the space that was occupied by the pedestrian street. We have a lot of greys within City Skylines 2, so it's actually kind of nice to get a big splash of orange right out the front of the city. So I recommend maybe have a think about how you can use color within your city, because I think that something like a tennis court with all its oranges and now this green, this nice little pop of green from these palm trees, I think is the perfect addition for this area. And with that, oh man, this area was starting to look pretty damn nice. For this little block, I wanted to create something of a building that was going to be a big chunk of office space as well as commercial, and this one was going to be a really good fit. Again, a bit of a splice together and a bit of a rotate and an extra building in between, and that was pretty much it. That was an easy one to do. I was still pretty stuck with this section of the building because I didn't really know how to change it up so that it was a little bit different to the rest of the architecture here. So I did try a couple of extra, just some growballs, seeing if I can get them to work, but it's pretty much impossible to work these growballs into these buildings. So this was just something that was not going to work. Instead, I decided to grab the same building, just raise it up and splice it in just slightly different. However, I was left with this little section underneath. I didn't really know what to do with this. But then I did remember a little technique that I learned from Sully in a video that he released a couple of weeks ago, where he created his own underground parking space using this invisible parking network. And this is such a great little strategy at creating these areas. I mean, we do have underground parking within the base game, but man, I'm probably never going to use that. This is something I'm always going to use, and it's functional. People will actually drive down here and use it. Yes, it's very flooded. Hopefully that'll disappear. But for now, this is working pretty well. And I decided just to put in a little roundabout. And this is a little private underground car space for the people that live here. How wonderful is that? And then for everybody else, I decided to add in just a little bit of surface parking. Not really that much, definitely not enough to really serve the people around here, and probably not enough to really represent what it's like in America. But I think like a place like this that is, you know, probably has a lot more underground car parks, definitely for some more of the modern buildings that are being developed, I feel like this little section here is probably enough. It's nothing too crash hot. I reckon we'll come back and add in some decals and really just kind of rough up the surface a little bit more. One of my favorite things that I've done here is probably adding in these custom bollards, which I think they are lights or maybe little chimneys. They're something, but they're not bollards. For some reason, they don't exist in the game at the moment. So this kind of works the part, at least for now. After placing down a couple of trees just to hide some imperfections, you know how it is, I wanted to create a bit of a path that was heading towards our park that we're pretty soon to be creating, and this was going to be the first little pathway heading towards that section. But before we got there, I just wanted to try something a little bit different. So of course, this is my very first attempt at creating a little wharf that has become abandoned and is just fading away into the bay. And the way that I've done this is I have dragged out a whole bunch of logs just using the line tool, and that way I can place that all into the water here, and by changing the landscape underneath it, it then contours to that land, which at first it was kind of like, oh, that's annoying. I didn't really want that to happen, but it actually gave a pretty good opportunity to then define where the logs sat, and then also kind of gave this really cool effect where the logs were not really sitting totally straight within the water. I ended up using that same technique by dragging out another set of logs. This time I wanted to make it so that they were really all over the place, had been in the water for quite some time and really pushed around by the currents, and then dragging it into the water. I felt like this worked really well. We've also got a couple of little logs that are poking up as, I guess, maybe like the pillars that were holding up the wharf at some point. And I feel like this was turning out pretty nice. Decided just to decorate the rest of this area by placing in some rocks and also some bushes down below just to act as seaweed. And honestly, this is a bit of a rabbit hole. I could probably detail this all day, but I felt like this is like a good start at potentially building and designing some more of these sort of areas, which I'm kind of keen for. Let me know if you end up doing something similar, because I feel like we could do some kind of interesting stuff under the water. After all that, it was time to get back to our second wharf, and for this one, I wanted there to be a fairly modern building that sat on here, and I also kind of wanted it to be a white building. I don't know why, but I just felt like something kind of modern and something nice and bright and white felt like would be a nice contrast to the one that sat on the other side. But again, really struggled with the types of buildings to place here, and I almost went for this global building, but I ended up choosing this other one, which is another signature building, this time commercial. And once I placed it down, I was kind of like, all right, well, maybe we just make this whole wharf here just a bit of a commercial district. So I spliced in another building, which worked actually pretty well to get in there. And then I had a little bit of room out the front to then create another little park area, just a bit of a plaza, as well as a tiny little growable that sits there. and this was just a bit of a restaurant too, which I felt like was a nice little addition. Also added in a bit of detail, a bit of props just to kind of make it look a little bit nicer around here, and this one came together much faster, and I think kind of nice it's a bit different as well. And with the two smaller wharves finished, it was then time to get to our large parked area, our rail line park. I also wanted to drag out that train line so it hugged right alongside it, and that way we can have a nice little pathway that kind of was attached to it. Because that's what this whole rail line was going to be turned into, a bit of a pathway as it stretched throughout this park. Of course, inspired by the many abandoned train lines that have been converted into parks. We got many of these around the world. The High Line is probably the most famous one, which I think is a pretty good comparison being in the same city, well, neighboring city. We also have one within Sydney, which is a bit of a knockoff version of it. Not quite as nice. I've done both of them, and definitely the High Line is way more impressive, but if your city has one, let me know, because I feel like they're all over the world and I'm always surprised at how many places actually have them. So let me know if you got one. I think they're kind of cool. Unfortunately, creating the one in New Dimesburg wasn't that easy. I thought it was going to be as simple as just dragging out an invisible pathway throughout the rail line and pretty much just calling it a day, but I guess because we've already got a network down here, the train line being a network, it made it really, really tricky to actually drag out any sort of pathway through it. Nobody would actually take it, nobody would walk along it, and that was not going to do it. I really wanted to see people actually using it. And I tried a couple of different techniques here. I used Move It to drag out the nodes throughout the course of the track. That didn't really work. I then tried to create my own line by just sinking some fence into the ground, but that looked a little bit weird, so didn't do that. The way that I decided to do it was I deleted the whole train line and just followed the same path by creating my own path on either side where the gravel would sit, and then I am getting some little benches here to act as the sleepers, and they are going to be the sleepers for the train line. And what I like about this is that I like the fact that these are wooden sleepers now, which then kind of gives it a bit more of an old look. And then I kind of imagine that the actual rail line has been ripped up and just the sleepers are still intact. And I felt like this was a pretty good way of creating this area, just making it feel a little bit different to the other train lines around the place, the ones that still exist. And then I decided to just detail it up. I removed some sleepers, some places, and then just added a bit more pathway between it. Just a bit of a concrete section with some benches around the place and some lights, and also some little flowers in between, just getting a bit of a style for the whole area, which once I figured out the style, I felt like it was coming along pretty well. And with a pretty good idea of how I was going to create the thing now, I then just continued the journey along throughout the park, just connecting it up to where the soccer field is. I tell you what, using Anarchy is so great because you can actually then drag out these paths so they do connect up to these fields and to the different parts of your park, and people actually use it, which is always very nice to see. And I really like this path in particular because it does connect up to a little bit of a pier, which I have to admit, I do really hate just dragging out a pathway into the water and calling it a pier. I would so want to see just some actual piers to be able to place down, and I guess we'll probably have to wait until Asset Editor becomes a thing, because I think the next DLC is something like piers and bridges or something like that, and then I guess we'll get some actual functioning piers. But for now, we're kind of stuck with what we got, but I do really hate dragging out paths and calling it a pier. I don't know, something I just really hate. It took a little bit of time detailing up our pathway, but I felt like it really got there in the end, just using the same technique as before and just leaving little spaces between the tracks just so people can have a little sit down and just a bit of relax. I feel like that was a good little spot for some benches. But I think the best little addition we got here is the addition of the little freight cars just sitting on the tracks. And of course, I reckon they would have just dragged these out here just as a bit of a nod, you know? There might be a little plaque that sits there kind of explaining what the old track was used for. But But with the track pretty much finished, I was just finishing off the rest of the park with some very simple paths and just a couple of trees here and there. But what do you think of this whole area? Let me know if you're going to do something similar too, because I think this is like a fun little addition to the city. And I also think that it does still kind of look like train track. And hopefully just by the style of it and, you know, by seeing the little sleepers in between the pathway kind of gives off that impression. But that's about it for the time lapse. Let's dive back in and get back to building. All right. Loving the way that the city is now looking with the wharves and just the detailedness of everything is just making the place look a whole lot more realistic and just more atmospheric, which I am absolutely loving. And speaking of loving, kind of loving the colors at the moment. The game just changes colors so often and it's really hard to pinpoint what's changing because I feel like there's just so many factors. But we're in wintertime. I've tweaked the settings a little bit. It's very cloudy. It's a little bit foggy, but I kind of dig it. I'm going to give you a bit of a tour of what we've been building and then we're going to get back to building because there's a few more things left to do. So let's have a little bit of an explore and let's start with our two main wharves down here, which I love so much. I love the way that they are quite different to one another, you know, in terms of color and style, but then they do have a bit of similarities, which I do also really like. But I also didn't expect to be doing one to be predominantly residential and then one is all commercial, which I actually think is a pretty cool balance because we are seeing a lot of people come over to this one and doing a little bit of shopping. A lot of people, in fact, I believe are going towards, nope. Well, one of these is a doctor's clinic and a lot of people have been wandering over to that. So kind of a strange place to go visit the doctor, but hey, if people are walking along here, I don't mind. And I think that this is just a great amount of people. Although probably a few too many dogs. I think I might get that mod that removes the dogs, I'm sorry to say. I'm sure you want to see some dogs walking around, but it just feels a little bit unrealistic. I do like the amount of people though. I think that really works. Though I would like to see more people wandering up this way. If I was playing City Skylines 1, I'd place a couple of crowd spawners, which just act like parks, but I don't have that in City Skylines 2. So maybe we have another way of attracting people up here. Find It does have a couple of spawners, although they're not people spawners, which is something that would be quite useful, although I don't really want to see people spawn here, I just want people coming here. Actually, some seagull spawners. Okay. Can I place these? Can't tell if this is actually doing anything, but a couple of seagulls would be nice. Check that out. That is fantastic. I love that. Just some seagulls. Perfect. Way up you go. Wait, these guys look pretty cool. All right, now we're in business. So a lot of seagulls now. I suppose that's probably a good area for some seagulls. Seagulls. Yeah, gazebos always have seagulls. Yes, look at them flying around. See, little things like that just add so much detail to these areas. I just think that, just like a subtle thing, just some birds flying around. Oh man, that's beautiful. But people, we want people walking around. We could maybe drag out one of these areas. I do have a mod that allows me to drag these out. So potentially, and I don't know if it's gonna work because I haven't tried this yet, but if I was to just drag out this area, this might encourage people to come and hang out here. Alright, this could take a little while, so I might drag out a couple more and we'll see if it works. Because I do have another area that nobody is walking around in, but I actually don't think that this is an area that people really need to get to. You know, it's not exactly any sort of destination. So I'm gonna do the same treatment. I'm gonna drag out another park area, and we'll see if this encourages people to actually use this path. Okay, I've given it some time, nobody's showing up. Maybe I need to wait just a little bit longer. I'll come back at the end of the episode, but I have also dragged out a couple of extra areas just to see if maybe stretching across all these paths will help. I've also dragged out an invisible path and messed up my building that set there before, but that's all good. We'll see what happens. Maybe this is just something we need to wait a little bit longer for. But let's continue our journey because we've only just started at. And I also love this large building that we have out the front, which I think is just perfect. I think it's exactly what we need. Obviously 2 buildings, 3 buildings spliced in together, but you know, it's actually providing heaps of jobs. There is also a bit of residential in here as well. In fact, there's a lot going on all in this area. So I do think we need to add in one more thing, but we'll get there in a sec. But I just want to show you down here our park that we have created, which is actually quite bustling besides this pathway. And then of course we do have our wharf that is just fading away into the ocean, which I absolutely love. I am definitely going to be doing more of this throughout the city, but I really love the effect that you get as well when you kind of just tilt the camera. It fades in and then fades out. I think that's really cool. You can also see that you get this really great rippling effect, which just kind of distorts everything that's underneath the ocean. And you can also see that the actual props themselves have kind of just skewed to whatever the landscape is doing. So you really have this effect that, you know, it's being pushed around by all the sand and all the movements of the currents. And I just think that looks really cool. Okay, back to this area. With the amount of people that live and work and want to shop around here, I think we need to add something else in terms of parking, because at the moment we've only got street parking, and then we've got this little space here and then this underground section, which I don't think is holding a huge amount. I think we do need to make some sort of underground parking and make it so that it kind of fulfills all the demand for this whole space. In terms of where this underground parking is going to go, I've got a bit of an idea. Okay, so she's a bit of a mess, but I think that this is going to function pretty well. And I actually really like the angle that it's on. It kind of just like snakes its way into this underground area, which I still need to map out the parking. I want to try and make it so we've got a fair amount of parking that sits there. I've also continued our key that stretches around here so people can actually access it nice and easy. And I think that what I'm going to do to make it so that all this is not so ugly is we'll probably just cover it up with some trees. You knew that was coming. There, perfect. Okay, it might look a little bit like an underground swimming pool, but it is not. And it'll still function like a car park, okay? So just stop it. We'll get these guys and I'm gonna drop it, I believe it was 12.5. Like that, and hopefully this will connect pretty easily. There we go. And the moment of truth, will people actually drive down there and park? Yeah, they love it. How good is that? Now, I do wish it wasn't full of water. I'm hoping that I might maybe drain out at some point. I don't know. I mean, I've still got wishful thinking about this one too. I think it's because it's on a skinny plot of land that's out in the ocean. Or maybe we just need to wait a little bit longer. I don't know. Let's just see what happens. But that is working pretty well. Well, a little bit of time has passed since we were last in the save game, and we have made some changes. Some good and some bad. You can see that our central station with its rail yard is all here now, so we are up to speed. Wonderful. Okay, some bad. This. So I hadn't played for about 5 days, and when I booted up the game after about 5 days of not playing, I was greeted with this message. I could get past it. I just had to click continue maybe like 50 times, and then once I was in, we lost about, I don't know, 15,000 people. We lost all residential demand, and then we started to get a bit of this. A bit of a lack of workers. So, yeah. I don't really know what happened there. But whilst I was trying to troubleshoot and figure out what was going on, somehow like everything just like reset and all my settings are back to normal. So I'm gonna stop them. And my graphic settings have gone back to default, but I have to admit, I kind of like it. So I think I'm just gonna keep on going like this. I am a little bit worried about making any major changes just in case my save is corrupted or whatever. So if you've got any worries about that, please let me know if you've had an experience with that error before, but we'll just press on. We'll see what happens. So I do want to show you a couple of things that have been builded off camera, as well as ask you about a couple of things too, because I've got some ideas that I wanted to float by you. But basically I have been working on this key that is now wrapping around this whole section here. We've got this little park that we built, as well as a shop that I think is probably a pretty decent fit for that area, but I also sort of feel like we could probably fit something a little bit more of like a signature building. But this section over here is getting the most amount of action because this is where our walkway from our central station is. So what is quite a large transport hub and is only going to get much larger. This is like the direct route that you would take if you were going to walk it, and quite a lot of people are walking it. Quite a lot of dogs are also walking it. Basically, it stretches from this undercover section and then goes over this bridge here, which is only really possible. This angle here, this arch, this curve is only possible with Move It. So that was like something that was really cool, and it's a little bit wonky. I do need to fix it up a bit, but it's working pretty well and a lot of people are walking along it. So that's what we built. I quite like it. And when we finally start getting people out this way, I'm excited to see people actually trek it out all through this area. Now, something I wanted to put to you guys is I feel like we need something here. Something of like an old industrial thing, maybe like a big old warehouse that's been converted, or something that's kind of like rusting away, or I don't know, I just feel like something of an industrial site needs to go at least on one of these blocks as a bit of a feature, just because this whole section kind of feels like it was, you know, it's got like something to it, but I don't want it to be smoking, you know? Just want it there. So I don't know, I'm trying to figure that out. And then this is kind of interesting. So this section over here is what we kind of like left open in the last episode, and I put it to you guys, what can we do with this? Because I feel like there needs to be something going on here. And someone said, well, maybe this could potentially be where the subway pops up, and this is the connection to the subway line. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I mean, that could work. But I just want to show you something. Overground subway station. Have a look at this. I'm not going to place it down. Check out that roof. It's practically exactly the same as our central station. Now, I feel like that'd be really cool. But what do you reckon? Like, we could splice it into here, and it could be an addition to our central station. I feel like that almost caps it off, you know? Like, look at that. That works really well. If we were to place it in here, then we would have to do something pretty sneaky, because I don't want to get rid of that. I have to kind of like drag out the line so it kind of snakes around here. So that will be pretty tight and a little bit tricky, but I don't know. That could be kind of cool. So just a couple little things to think about while we just build the next little section. But, oh man, how good's the waterfront starting to look? Oh man, she's pissing down. All right, let's build one last thing. No, I don't think that's going to be the right fit. It just feels like they were a little too heavy. I think I just need to keep this thing a little bit more open. And rather than developing it up into something modern, I reckon this is new, this is modern, but whatever's down here, this is still old. Just a bit of an abandoned industrial lot. Love it. I'm also going to add in just a couple of little bits and pieces of industrial equipment. And I would actually love to place down a couple of leftover chimneys, but these unfortunately still smoke, so I can't really place them down. Yeah. Alright, for sure not perfect, but it's something. It's something at least, and I feel like that's the sort of space that I want to have for this area, at least for now. And we can turn it into something a little bit more extra a little later on down the track. What do you think this should be turned into, by the way? I feel like it needs to be kind of kept sort of low, but I don't know, I'm still trying to figure out what that could be. Also, an accident, kind of like it. But on this rainy New Dollarton day, I'm going to call it. Guys, thank you all so much for tuning into today's episode. Very much appreciated, as always. I hope you've enjoyed it. In the next one, I think we're going to be building some sort of elevated highway. Yeah, it's finally going to make its way throughout the city. I think we need it. Our city is starting to struggle in terms of traffic, and, well, it's struggling in terms of everything at the moment, but you know what I mean? I feel like it's time. So, let's do it. I want to give a special shout out to some of my patrons: Derek Vidal, Patrick Hallahan, TC0129, Tim 10 Biscuits, Peter, Salmon V, Sherrysville, Big 393, Shoki, and Agalis. I'm not going to say this right. Papa Yeo. Cheers, legends. I'll see you all in the next one.